What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Hitman. It's your host, Steven. Joining me for the first time in the studios, Jerry Marzinsky, everyone. And I'm sure you're familiar with the name, but he's been on a bunch of different shows, especially guys that I've worked with in the past. And he's a psychotherapist, retired, I believe, and he's got many more accolades on top of all of that. But folks, if it's your first time or you're returning and you want to support the show, it's free. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the show, share it with your friends. If you're on the audio, jump over to video. If you're on the video, jump on over to the audio. Audio platforms, we're on Spotify, Spreaker, and Apple Podcasts, but we're pretty much on anything, folks. You can find us anywhere. While you're there, make sure you leave a 5-star review, oh so graciously, and hit that follow and that notification bell. We do episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm sorry, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. I get it mixed up. But yeah, with all that said and behind us, Jerry, welcome to the show, brother.
Good to be there. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's a long-awaited episode. I've been really wanting to sit down and talk to you a little bit. You've been, in the medical field for longer than I have, a lifetime longer than I have. And so this is going to be a lot of interesting conversations that we're going to jump around to. And so for the folks that aren't familiar with who you are, what you do, if you just wouldn't mind just giving a little introduction of yourself and where they can support you the most.
Hey, well, I'm Jerry Marzinsky. I am supposed to be retired, but I'm working as a MACE psychoenergetic therapist at the present. I'm a commercial pilot, a certified scuba diver, a long distance motorcycle rider, um, and I've been working on the front lines of mental health for over 45 years now. So I've worked in virtually every kind of mental or psychiatric institution there is, including 17 or 18 years in the psychology department of a large state prison. Um, I worked in one of the biggest state psychiatric hospitals on the planet, uh, Central State Hospital in Central Georgia. There was probably close to 10,000 patients there when I got there in the 70s. Since been closed down, but there was every kind of mental illness known to man somewhere in that place. I mean, it's
Wow.
there were over 200 buildings, and it sprawled up well over 1,000 acres. So it was the size of a small town.
Wow. Yeah, that's all
Yeah,
crazy. Now you're an author as well, correct?
I am.
Okay, all
Um,
right. So what's the name of your book, and share it with the audience, please?
this is it right here. Amazing journey into the psychotic mind.
Oh, wow. Very
So
cool.
what
Very
I've been
cool.
doing is virtually the whole time that I've been on the front lines. I've been studying the voices that schizophrenics hear, that the psychiatric mafia insist are hallucinations.
Right.
They're not hallucinations.
No, there's definitely something to the behavioral and the psych problems that people are faced with in their life. I mean, especially when we look at the movies, which I do think the movies kind of give us a glimpse into reality. And with some of those, it's pertaining a lot to horror films or spirits, right? Or disembodied entities, if you would say. And I do think there's a direct correlation with that. And you've definitely done a lot of investigation with your career and have many experiences with all of that.
Yeah, was what surprised me is all through college and graduate school, and all the textbooks, um, they were saying that the voices that schizophrenics hear are hallucinations. Nobody looked any further than that. Um, when I got to Central State Hospital, I noticed that there was a one-to-one correspondence between the patients listening to these voices and how much trouble they got into. And I'd ask the staff, "What are these things?" They go, "Oh, well, they're just hallucinations." You know, and I'm like, "Well, what are they telling these people?" "Well, I don't know." They weren't the least bit interested. So here's hundreds of staff at this hospital, and nobody's interested in what these voices are telling schizophrenics. You know, um, so I was working at that point. I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, and our job was to get the highest functioning patients in that hospital, give them training for a job such as a barber, or cosmetologist, or janitors, something that they could go out and make a living with and get out of the hospital, right? And probably the most intelligent of the bunch were the schizophrenics, but they had some serious problems, uh, including hearing voices. And the other thing I noticed is that they would always sabotage themselves when they came close to graduating from one of their classes. They'd stop taking their medications. They'd get into a fight. They'd argue with the instructor. They'd start skipping classes, you know, and it was always right before they were about to graduate. And I found that both odd and frustrating. And
It's
you know,
like a pattern, right? So there's multiple patterns with a lot
there's
of these patients.
multiple patterns. So I was curious about what they were telling these people, you know, and after having been programmed to believe by the universities that these things were hallucinations, I was thinking, well, hallucinations would be like word salad, like dribble, sentences that didn't make any coherent sense, um, nothing understandable. Uh, but when I got onto the front lines, that's not what I saw.
Hmm.
These people were carrying on long, coherent, intense conversations with someone or something that I couldn't hear. So it was like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You could hear what the schizophrenic was saying, but couldn't hear what he was responding to.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Um, but it wasn't word salad. It wasn't hallucinations, um, because they were coherent conversations. Even hearing one half of them, they were coherent conversations. Um, so I started asking some of these guys, "What are these voices telling you?" And it took about a year to figure out how to not threaten them because we were working for this psychiatrist. So my job there at the time was to watch the population, find the ones who could function and be trained, and the others turn them into psychiatry if they were getting out of control. And psychiatry would just increase their drugs and virtually turn them into zombies so they weren't causing any problems. Um,
And
so
this is through medication, right? Just kind of
yeah.
sedate
So
them in some sort of
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah. The thing was control. Keep this massive population under control. So they would drug them senseless. They would. I've seen them times where they were drooling because of the amount of meds they gave them. You
What
know,
kind of medications, if you don't mind me asking? Like what
well,
class?
they were antipsychotic drugs. Like
Okay.
back when I was there was Thorazine, which was a very rough drug. I mean, it was uh, it's like a sledgehammer. Then they had stelazine, they had lithium for bipolar, but um, they had antidepressant drugs. They had a whole arsenal of drugs, and the drug company representatives were always in and out of there trying to sell them new medications.
Hmm.
So I started asking them what these voices were telling them, and it was patient after patient. What they were telling them was negative garbage. It was just, you're no good, you're rotten, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're worthless, nobody likes you. Um, your parents are faking like they care about you. Your girlfriend is cheating on you. Your boyfriend. It's always negative, constantly negative, abusive, derogatory, insulting, um, destructive, consistently. They
Wow.
never they never said anything good. So it's like that was the first pattern I noticed. It was always negative stuff, and I was like, okay, well, that's they stuck to that pattern, and it was like, why don't they go outside of that? If they're hallucinations, there should be some that are positive, some that are negative, some that are neutral, just smeared all over the place. Hallucinations are unpredictable. These This negativity was completely predictable. And I didn't just check it out with one. I would, when I found something, I'd start bringing in the others on my caseload. Or um, when I went to work for the psychology department of the prison, I actually had a group of psychotics that or schizophrenics that would tell me what they were hearing in real time. So while we're in the office, so I had like a window into their mind as to what these voices were telling them. But that was the first pattern I noticed, and I'm like, okay, why? If they're hallucinations, why aren't they random? There was uh, one lady that she was arguing with her voices as she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds, and the voices were telling her to, and she was heading off the hospital grounds while she was arguing with her voices that she didn't want to leave. You know, so these conversations I were hearing they weren't word salad. They were coherent, understandable conversations that these people were having with whatever it was they were talking to. Right? And what that was, I didn't know. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, at some point they can show that they're intelligent, right? Not the patient itself, but I'm saying these entities that they are dealing with these voices in their head, right? If someone's telling you that you're ugly, this, that, they're kind of like strategically trying to pull you down into some sort of negative
Yes.
vibration or something. And it may be along the lines sabotaging you enough to maybe make you want to unalive yourself at some point. Is unaliving yourself? I have to be specific with some of my words, but is it a common thing with some of these patients?
Yeah. It's 3 to 5 times higher for schizophrenics than it is with the general population. So
Okay.
they do kill themselves at a rate much higher than the general population. But so do psychiatrists. Psychiatrists kill themselves at a rate almost equal to that of their most disturbed patients, which are the schizophrenics.
Right.
So that tells you something.
Yeah, there's an imaginary connection there, maybe. Right? Of some sort. I mean, at some point, does the um does the healthcare giver get some sort of effect from these entities, would you say as well, when they are treating their patients?
Well, I found that that was true in the case with psychiatrists. Okay,
Okay.
it was one thing I noticed when I got to that big state hospital that was that psychiatrists were being assaulted at a rate much higher than any other class of worker. They were being physically assaulted higher than uh, um, psychiatric nurses. They were being assaulted higher than regular doctors, dentists, optometrists, counselors, psychologists. They were right up there. And what was strange is that they would only see these patients for 15, 20, 30 minutes at the most a month. And I'm kind of wondering, um, like, what are they saying to these patients that are causing them to go off on these guys and physically assault them? Didn't make any
Mhm.
sense to me at all. And I couldn't find an answer. It took me 7 years to find an answer for that. It was right before I was about ready to leave the hospital. So, what happened there was, I just stuck that in the back of my mind. I mean, this whole thing was like a giant puzzle, and it was driving me nuts, and I'd get a piece here and a piece there and a piece there, and then I'd get pieces I didn't know where they went, but I knew they were pieces, like the assault on the psychiatrist. Had no idea why that was happening, especially in the limited amount of time these people were spending with the psychiatrist. Um, so I knew the side effects of those drugs were awful. I mean, they're just, I got a list of them here. This is just some of them. There was dizziness, drowsiness, anxiety. This one's for Thorazine. So Thorazine is kind of out of vogue these days, but the other ones have similar nasty side effects. Not as bad, but similar. So anxiety, sleep problems, insomnia, breast swelling or discharge, changes in menstrual period, weight gain, swelling in the hands or feet, dry mouth, stuffy nose, blurred vision, constipation, um, uncontrolled muscle movements, lip smacking, tongue darting, stiffness in the neck, tightness in the throat,
Mm.
trouble breathing or swallowing, lightheaded feeling like you might pass out, confusion, agitation, feeling jittery, trouble sleeping, weakness, breast swelling or discharge, seizures, jaundice, yellowing of the skin or eyes, low white blood cell count. And that's just some of them.
Oh yeah, right, right. And through the trials, because I used to work in research and everything. That's a surface level idea of some of the side effects that do happen, especially with some of how these trials are ran. They're ran within not as long of a duration as you would expect for certain things to be out on the street and
Right.
legal for people to take, because there's a lot of long term things that start settling in over time, especially with medications. And to me, particularly, I think medicine at some point is something that may antagonize the body and its systems while it's putting a band-aid on certain things. But it's that's where we get like pathophysiology from. Especially, we really recognized what pathophysiology was is because we were giving medications to people. We were like, oh wow, it's actually causing this. It's actually
Hmm.
causing the cell to do this in some sort of way, which biblically, it's a Christian podcast. It's I go back to the word sorcery, and sorcery relates to
Pharmacia.
exactly, right? So there's a connection there.
And that's exactly what these drugs were doing. With long-term use, these drugs would shrink the patient's brain. So they were doing physiological, neurological damage with extended use. And what they would do is when these side effects of these drugs, side effects, I mean, they're toxic effects of these drugs. And these drugs are poisonous, you know. So when the neurological jitteriness started showing up, the tongue guarding, the nervous, the anxiety, they would give cogentin that would mask these symptoms and just go right ahead and just keep giving the antipsychotic drugs, destroying that person's neurological system while they were doing it. And so the side effects were not much appreciated by the hospital patients. So they would lie to the psychiatrist a lot. The psychiatrist would bring them in and like, how's your medications doing? It was always around the medications. They wouldn't talk to them about anything else. It was the medications. Are they working for you? Are you sleeping? Do you need more? Do you need? And they'd seldom give them less. They would always be increase them or add another one, or add two or three other ones. And
Oh
the
man.
patients didn't much appreciate that because they were turning them into zombies. So they'd lie to the psychiatrist about hearing voices, because if they admitted it
Ah,
and they complained too much, the psychiatrist would drug them more. Right.
right.
And they would go off. Almost all of them would eventually go off these meds at some point. They didn't want to take them. They didn't like them. Um, Matter of fact, one of the first things I saw that kind of told me that this system was somewhat out of kilter. Um, because when you're coming out of graduate school, they brainwash you. You think, oh, they got the answers to everything, and you've been taught all these counseling theories and all this stuff. Using those regular counseling theories on schizophrenics is like shooting a rhino in the butt with a BB rifle, trying to get it to move.
Yeah.
Uh, doesn't work. Just
Right.
doesn't work. Um, so the medications did work. It calmed them down. They were major tranquilizers. They they weren't as abusive. They weren't as nasty. They weren't as agitated. So they were much more controllable. But in the long run, it didn't cure anything. I mean, if they stopped taking their medications, the voices would come right back if they disappeared. For the most part, they never disappeared. They just got softer. They got quieter, you know. So the person wasn't as tormented by them when they were on these medications. Um, but they kept going off them anyway. And we had a rule at the rehab center that if they went off 3 times, that we would discharge them because if they weren't going to stay on those meds, which were the only things we had back in the 70s, if they weren't going to stay on those, then they were going to decompensate. They were going to go crazy again once they went off them. They wouldn't be able to hold the job. So what we do is, discharge the person who was non-compliant with meds and put somebody in there who we thought would be, that would stay on their meds. Those guys were fairly rare. Um, so come 7 years at the state hospital, the seventh year I was fixing to go back to graduate school again. This one gal stopped taking her meds. She was in the cosmetology class. She was doing good, making good grades. She was doing good work. Uh, Her instructor had good things to say about her, but this she went off her meds. I got called down there, and she was completely out of it, paranoid, screaming, hollering, talking to something that wasn't there. And she had gone off her meds again, third time. So I had to call her mother and say, "Listen, we're going to discharge her. Uh, she won't. She's not compliant with her medications." And the mother just begged me not to do that because she couldn't handle her. She said, I can't handle her. I can't deal with it. Um, I'll come up there and we'll find out why she wasn't taking her meds." Now, prior to that, my first few weeks at or maybe probably the first few months at the hospital, I was on the first floor of this big psychiatric unit, and there was a banister that ran up to the second floor of the psychiatric unit. Now, I knew at the top of that banister there was no cap. It was just an open hole. And I noticed it, but I didn't pay any attention to it. One day I'm walking on the first floor, and here's one of the maintenance men cutting the cap off the bottom of the banister. So he had a grinder. He was cutting through the metal pipe, and sparks were flying all over the place, and smoke was coming up, and it was the most exciting thing going on at the time. So there was a bunch of patients standing there watching the fireworks. So I just joined them, and we all stood there watching the sparks fly all over the place, and wondering what he was doing. When that cap fell off of that banister, a waterfall of thousands of psychiatric pills came pouring out of that banister just like a fire hose. I mean, they were just gushing out of that,
Oh my goodness.
thousands of them. They had been throwing those pills down that banister for decades.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's
So I don't
crazy.
I don't know if the staff caught on and that's why they were doing that. I don't know why he was cutting that off, but I stood there in awe. These things were bouncing all over the floor. They spread out like a bunch of, crabs and running around the beach. They just went everywhere, just gushed down, just it was like a
It's like a
stream of
gumball machine
yeah, like a out of
opening up.
control gumball machine. I was just like, whoa, each one of those was a vote by a psychiatric patient to stay psychotic. So I'm like, what is going on with that? Why is that happening? It didn't make any sense to me. So it was like that image was burned in my brain, and I'm like, I got to find out what's going on here. Why aren't they taking their medications? It's obvious that the side effects were bad, but from what I saw, being psychotic was like hell on earth. If you're seeing monsters come out of the wall, uh, people, the voices are telling you somebody's going to murder you, or they're going to murder you, or they're deciding how they're going to murder you, or telling you people are laughing at you, people are plotting out. I mean, it's like hell on earth. I mean, just every rotten, vile thing that you can imagine, they would tell these people. Um, so it's like why are they going off their meds? You know? So I started asking them, and they would say what I expected. The side effects are awful. And it's true. These meds are toxic. I mean, they're toxic. That's why the side effects are so nasty because they're poisonous. They're doing neurological damage with long-term use. Um, but they do a wonderful job of controlling these people. They turn them into zombies, or they significantly calm them down. Um, the ones in the rehab center, they could at least function minimally, to learn a low skill trade while they were on the meds. Off the meds, they couldn't function. So I'm like, why are they choosing to go nuts? Why did thousands of patients throw their pills down that banister? You know? So I started asking them, and the first thing they said was the side effects of the meds. Okay, understandable. So I went to the DSM and I got all the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, all the bad stuff, the hallucinations, the auditory, the visual hallucinations, the paranoia, like a whole page full of nasty stuff characterized by paranoid schizophrenia. And I bring that in when one of my clients on my caseload went off their meds and they put them back on and they were sane again. I'd bring them in. I'd ask them, "Why'd you go off your meds?" "Oh, the side effects." "Well, what side effects did you have?" And I gave them a piece of paper. I said, "Write down the side effects you had," because the side effects were different for different drugs and they reacted differently to different people. So they'd write down 5 or 6 side effects. And then I'd give them the check sheet with all these schizophrenic symptoms. And I'd say, which one of these did you experience when you went off your drugs? When you lost it, you went crazy. Which of these did you experience? And they'd check a whole bunch of them. And I'd give them both sheets back and I said, which was worse? Every single one of them said that being psychotic was worse than the side effects. Not a one of them said the side effects was worse. And then I'd ask them, then why did you go off your meds? And they would say, I don't know. One after another. This went on for 3 years. You know, I kept asking them the same question and got the same answer. I don't know. And I asked them, I said, well, if you don't know, who does? They go, I don't know. So it was like, I felt like, beating my head against the wall. But when this girl in the cosmetology class, when her mother agreed to come up and say, "We'll figure out why she went off her meds. I'll come up there and we'll talk to her and we'll figure it out." I said, "Great, I got a mother on my side now." So I said, "Okay, come on up. We'll give it a shot. See what happens." And so we met one Friday afternoon up in my office. She came in, the patient came in, and both of us, her mother and I, are both, saying, "Why did you go off your meds? You knew you were going to get thrown out of class. You knew this was going to happen if you went off your meds again. This has happened to you a bunch of times before. Why did you go off your meds?" She said, "You won't believe me." And I told her, "I've heard a bunch of strange stuff since I've been here. I don't think you're going to say anything that's going to throw me out of kilter." And so she said, "Okay, I'll tell you. The voices told me that the side effects that I was experiencing of these drugs were were from these drugs, and the drugs were poison. And so the voices were telling her that the drugs were poison, and that the psychiatrist was poisoning her." Right,
Mm,
right away, click. I went, "That's the reason these psychiatrists are getting beat up all the time."
right.
That's the only
Right.
thing that made sense. Especially in 15 minutes. I mean, you really have to work to set off somebody in 15 minutes to the point where they're assaulting you.
Yeah, and that's another thing too that kind of makes me think that these entities are as intelligent as they present themselves to be because they know the science of medicine and will, tell it to the patient. Then the patient doesn't know that I mean, yes, the patient can understand they're going through side effects from taking certain medicines, but now it seems like this voice is trying to use some sort of narrative to make them not take this medication, right?
Yeah, the voices don't like the medication because what
Right.
they want the patient upset, angry, paranoid, producing negative emotional energy, which I found out that's what they feed on.
Yeah, I mean, these things are like what? They're like parasites in
They're
some
they're
sort of
they're
way, right?
emotional. Yes, they're emotional parasites. Um, and I found that out later on too. It was another pattern that I noticed that w- w- a- o- before the patient was attacked, they had plenty of energy. After they were attacked, they didn't have any energy. Right? And that was happening time after time after time after time. So I started doing a questionnaire, a 1 to 10 questionnaire, with a whole bunch of different patients. Like, how much energy did you have before the voices attacked you, and how much did you have after? On 1 to 10 scale. I did that with a bunch of them, you know, and you could see that after the voices attacked, their energy level went down to nothing, and it was a 1 to 1 correlation. So I think we ran an analysis of variance on those sheets, and it came out as statistically significant. There was something happening there,
Mhm.
you know. Um, so the voices didn't like them taking those medications because they wanted them upset. They they wanted to feed off of that negative emotional energy, so and it was it happened consistently, you know. When when the voices attacked, their energy would leave, but they didn't notice that, It was like and that was strange. They would notice it after I brought it up, but they were feeling so bad and so confused and so out of kilter that they didn't notice it on their own for the most part, you know. Um, so I would ask them. I said, say, do you notice that your energy level is drops after you're attacked by the voices? And they think about it, and if after thinking about it, then if they would finally go, Well, yeah, come to think of it, it does." And I said, You didn't use it yourself, right? You weren't out working or digging or doing any physical activity." They go, "No, no, I was just lying in bed all night, tossing and turning because the voices were all over me." And I said, "When the voices leave, you feel you don't have any energy, right?" And they go, "Yeah." I go, "Well, where did it go?" They go, "I don't know." They
Mhm.
didn't know. They didn't know that the voices were taking it. So I'd say, "Listen, if you stuck your hand in a fire 5,000 times and each time you got burnt, what was burning you?" They had no trouble saying the fire. Right away, boom, they had it. And I said, "Well, you've heard the voices for thousands of times over the years you've been dealing with them. And every single time that they came, your energy level was down, right? Where do you think your energy was going?" They would say, "I don't know." They were being blocked from the awareness that these things there was a correlation between the voices showing up and their energy leaving.
Right, right. So I wanted to hit on something real quick. Remember that movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you know how like when he becomes a ghost, he's kind of like waving his hands in front of people and he's irritated and almost stressed out that no one is giving him any type of sign that or acknowledgement that he's kind of still, real of some sort, right? And I think in some way these entities, these demons, these workers of darkness that are here on the earth still with us, it's just, we can't see them, they're in this disembodied realm of some sort. To
Yeah, their
me,
energy.
yeah, energy, right? So I see the same thing. If they don't put if they don't contribute to terrorizing or stressing people out or oppressing or doing whatever these sinister things that they do to people, I feel they're like they get that feeling of like Patrick Swayze in the movie Ghost, where he's like irritated that no one knows that he's still there or something. Yeah, it's almost like they're in this dry place, right, where uh, they need to have this connection with certain people, and a lot of them, seem to have mental illness, uh, but they have these connections because it gives them that energy, that acknowledgement, that gratification of some sort.
Well, they what they want is the negative emotional energy. That's what they feed off of. So they what they do is they since they're energetic, I mean, the human being can only see a very small fraction of the energy around us.
I mean, we
You
can
know,
only see a certain percent of the light that exists in our
yes,
reality.
a very small segment. These things are around all the time,
Yeah.
right? They can put thoughts into your thought stream,
hmm
and that's what they do. So in the vast majority of cases, those thoughts sound just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through your mind on a given day. There's no "we are the voices" or, nothing like that for the most part. They sound just like the regular thoughts in your thought stream, but the intention is very different. You
hmm
know, they're consistently negative, abusive, and nasty. You know,
Oh yeah.
they want to destroy the person that they've been assigned to, you know,
hmm
and once they get you upset, they feed off of that negative emotion that they generate. So that's why they don't want the patients taking these major tranquilizers because it calms them down and it makes their work much harder to get them upset so they can feed off of that negative emotional energy.
Right.
Mm,
Right. Yeah, and you know what? I think at some point, even me and you, I think that we battle with these things on a daily basis. It's just
yes.
a very limited scale compared to the person or the people that we're kind of getting into, right?
Yeah,
That
they hit us all.
yeah,
They hit us all. All of us have had thoughts where you're minding your own business, and all of a sudden, this thought flies into your head to whack the guy in front of you in the head, or you know,
crazy.
punch. Just stuff you would never do on your own.
Right. I mean, how about prayer? For me, example is myself. Like sometimes I'll be in prayer and I'll get just a ridiculous thought, and I'm like, Lord Jesus Christ, please, like, get all these entities, any of these, you know, forces away. Shine the light so that the cockroaches scatter, for example, and just get them away from my mind for a second while I pray with you. And literally, those thoughts will not pop up in my head. Almost like
Yeah,
even if I tried, then gives me confirmation of what we're
yeah.
talking about.
They're definitely anti-religious, which is the second um, pattern I found. So in this rehab center where I was working, the chaplain would have these ice cream socials every once in a while. They'd have a dance, and he'd do a sermon, and then they'd dance and eat ice cream, and kind of have a little party down there. I noticed that all the schizophrenics on my ward did not go down there. And I went, that's odd. Why are they sitting here staring at the ceiling or reading murder mysteries or watching war movies and stuff, instead of going down there and having some fun? So I noticed that the first time and I went, that's odd. Second time I saw it again. Third time I started asking them questions about it. And they said, I don't like preachers. I don't trust preachers. There is no God. I prayed to God a million times and he hasn't helped me at all. Stuff like that. So then one day I had one guy come in who was hearing voices. He said, I was hearing voices last night and I prayed the 23rd Psalm. And he said the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They couldn't stand the 23rd Psalm, you know. So I started handing that out to other people hearing voices. And the feedback that came back from them was that the voices got very upset at them repeating the 23rd Psalm. They got upset at them reading the Bible. They got upset at them going to church. And so I started asking them, what happens when you go to church? and it broke into 3 different segments. If the voices were very weak, they would shut up when the person entered the church. If they were moderate strength, they would get louder, and they would start mocking the preacher and telling the guy, "Why are you listening to this garbage? Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's gonna save you?" You know? And they just get louder so the person could not hear what the preacher was saying. And if the voices were very strong, it would drive them out of the church. They would get up and they would run out of that church, you know. So here's all these patterns that start showing up. And there's 23 of them at this point. And any of you guys working out there and with schizophrenics or working in psych hospitals, these patterns are on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. They're right in front of you. Go look at them. You'll see them. The caveat is that if the voices are running predictable, consistent patterns, they can't be hallucinations, like the psychiatric mafia insists. The psychiatric mafia and the medical establishment has done no research whatsoever on these voices that these people are hearing. They're like the Egyptian priests of old. They just go, "We are the psychiatrists and we hereby declare that these voices are hallucinations because we said so," with no research, no backing whatsoever. That that's what they look like. That's what they are. You know. So, while I was studying these things at the state hospital, one of the voices got upset with one guy because he was answering questions that I was asking him about the voices, and he went and told us one of the psychiatrists said, this guy's asking me questions about the voices and he's upsetting me. I don't like it. Next morning, I ended up in front of the psychiatrist on the red carpet with him saying, "You will not ask these people about their voices. They're hallucinations, and what you're doing is you're just um, reinforcing uh, the voices, and you're making these people worse." You know, so you're you're questioning our dictate that these things are hallucinations by probing a little too deep into what's going on there. And he warned me, "So you keep this up, you'll be disciplined. Well, you'll be in trouble." You know, that happened twice there. So I had to really slow down and stay under the radar there because they were having none of it. They didn't care about what the voices were. They um, Nobody was really getting better with those drugs. They were just treating symptoms, and they didn't want anybody else looking into anything else. You know, so the voices they create negative emotion. These voices they energetically drain their victim. They get louder after sunset. They consistently get louder after once it gets dark. They get louder and stronger. They get louder when ignored. So I heard one psychiatrist tell a patient. I was in the office with him. The guy told him. He said, "Just ignore them. They're just hallucinations." And I brought that guy back in a week later, and I said, "How's that going for you? Ignoring them?" He said, "It's not going well at all. They won't be ignored. They get louder when I try to ignore them." So yeah, they have an intention, and the intention is to destroy that individual. And they're of different levels of intelligence. Some of them are very stupid. There was one that would just say, "Hey, hey, hey, hey," all the time. And here's the patient wondering whether he meant, "Hey, you," or "Hey, like the grass," you know. So they go from there all the way to being very, very, very devious and very sly, almost incomprehensibly so. And then kind of there's a middle ground where you know, they're very devious, they're very tricky, they're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't believe anything they say. You can't trust anything they say, for the most part, except if it's to get you in deeper trouble. So when I was working in the prison, there were a lot of meth addicts there who went psychotic. I mean, I saw more people go psychotic on meth than any other drug. The prison was full of them. They start using meth on the streets, and then one day they hear voices while they're high, and they go, "Well, that's just a hallucination." And then when they come down, it goes away. So they're convinced that it's a hallucination. You know? So that may happen a few more times, and they go, "Oh, it'll just go away." And then one day it doesn't. You know, they
Mhm.
hear the voices, and they're there, and they're there forever after that. They're just as crazy as any of the regular mental patients.
Yeah. So when these things have a connection with people, if we could compare us being the driver in a car for our consciousness, where would you place these entities inside the vehicle? Or how would you kind of
They'd be like a hijacker,
so they would kind of like put you in the back seat in some
as
sort of
much
way?
as they could. They want to take as much control as they can.
Okay.
You
Gotcha.
know.
And this is
Now,
not only to harvest obviously energy for their part and to drain you and to torment you and to make you go into this lower vibrational state. Now that they've got the wheel, this almost gives them some sort of kingship over you or something.
mhm, it's what they want. They want control, as much control as they can get.
Yeah.
You know, and then they begin hurting the patient, telling him to hurt himself. And you might wonder, you look and go, well, yeah, they great majority of cases, they tell these patients to kill themselves. And you
Yeah.
might wonder, well, okay, if they're feeding off these people, then why are they telling them to kill themselves? Why are they cutting off their food source? Well, if you look at what happens when somebody suicides, the entire family just gets launched into a hell. You know, it'd be like, "Oh, I should have seen this. I should have done something else. I should have helped him more. I should have done this. I should have done that." Now, just guilt and shame just pouring from all the family members. They're all feeling bad now.
Right. And
You
you
know,
know what? Maybe these entities have a bigger plan with just isolating to the individual itself. Maybe they want to attack the families, right? Maybe they want to break the families apart, right?
oh, they do.
I mean, I've
They
seen,
do.
I've responded to 911 calls. I've dealt with behavioral emergencies. And when I get there, oh my goodness, the spouses of the individual that I go and run the call on, man, are they torn apart? They're torn apart emotionally. It's almost like they not only want their loved one back to being normal, but now you see a lot of things like divorce. I'll go into
Yeah.
a guy's house who, we run on him quite frequently, and he's got a history of schizophrenia. His house is completely clean, but when you look around his home, you see pictures of what he used to look like. He looked a lot better, by the way. This was him in his past, and you see him having a family, but he lives in the home on his own. Like, you see that the family got broken apart. From a
Yeah.
spiritual implication of it, it's got other, effects going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. They hate children. They hate families. They hate marriages. They want to break all those things apart. And then you look at until just recently, until Trump got in, the U.S. was one of the biggest child sex trafficking organizations on the planet. The U.S. government. They were bringing in all these kids from Ukraine. They were bringing in all these migrant kids, and none of them were vetted. None of the places they were going were vetted. All they had to do was have an address, and they would deliver the kid to that address. That was it. You know,
Hmm.
you have, what was it, 45,000 kids or 450,000? I mean, thousands and thousands of kids disappeared at the behest of the U.S. government. When Biden was in there.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it
Right.
was sick.
I really wish, man, that the medical field would at least try to start to consider, which it will never, but try to start to consider that some of these things that we see objectively in the medical field are from effects of the spiritual nature that's around us, if that makes any sense. Because when you
Well,
talk about spiritual stuff, it's all pseudo. It's
yeah.
all.
Well, that's what's so good about there just fairly recently a new energetic psychotherapy came out that has a spiritual component, and it's the only psychotherapy that I've ever seen. And it's not blatant, but it's there in two places. And if it wasn't there in those two places, this thing wouldn't work. But it works with trauma. It'll go in there and it'll set up a um, apparatus where the negative energy is being drained and shunted to the spirit. The spirit transmutes it to positive energy. It's
Hmm.
called the Mace Energy Method. In an hour, um, these traumas that have been plaguing people all their lives, and one of the most common ones is I'm worthless. Something happened to them when they were a kid, and they decided that they were worthless because this thing happened, and they went through their entire life. Some of them 65, 70, 80 years old that went through their entire life feeling that they were worthless because of this thing that happened to them when they were 6, and it got buried in their subconscious. You know, Mace will pull it out of there and dissolve it into positive energy. It doesn't get rid of the energy, it transmutes it from negative to positive. And then you ask them, well, how do you feel about that trauma now? And it's gone. It's like neutral. I remember it, but there's no emotional charge to it. I've never seen anything work like this specific psychotherapy. And they don't want it out there. You know, it yields permanent results without drugs, and it handles most common psychological problems within an hour. They're gone.
Hmm. Yeah.
And there,
So,
there's some there's some videos on it on my website. It's incredible what it
yeah.
does.
Have you ever in your career tried to, like, one-on-one one of these entities, with some of your patients? Or maybe not one-on-one, but have you ever come across any experiences where it's almost like these entities have spoken directly to you?
Yes, I've had that happen. It started off with the patient would tell me. So Well, while I was in the state hospital, I had to be very careful after I got in trouble with that psychiatrist for asking questions about what the voices were telling these people. So I had to put it in low gear and be very careful, fly under the radar. But after I got out of graduate school, um, again, and moved, I got a job in Arizona in the psychology department of the Arizona State Prison. Right? And what had happened is Proposition 13 started in California. It was a tax rebellion. The people were tired of paying these absurd taxes, so they demanded that the taxes be lowered. The government went, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And what they did is shut down all the state hospitals. So that caught on. It just rolled all the way across the United States. They cut out all the state hospitals. So these schizophrenics, they couldn't work. They couldn't hold a job. Um, They didn't have any home. They didn't have anywhere to go. So they had to, steal and sell drugs and use drugs and just do all this illegal stuff just to survive. They ended up in the state prisons. So here they were thinking they were saving money by emptying out the state hospitals, and the great majority of these guys are ending up in the state prison at virtually twice the cost because now they're paying for security and alarm systems and guards and high security cells and stuff. I mean, it's much more expensive than it is just to keep these guys on a ward at a state hospital. Right?
Mhm.
So when I before I got to well, when I got to the prison, what I'd do is I'd always ask them what the voices were telling them, and they'd tell me what the voices were saying. Okay, as these number of patterns started increasing, I was at the state prison, and what I had was a group of schizophrenics, maybe 10 to 17 all the time, the whole time I was there, whatever unit I was working, who would tell me in real time what the voices were telling them as we were talking. Right. So I would have conversations with them through the patient. And, it was always usually abusive stuff. "Don't listen to this guy. He's crazy. He doesn't know what he's doing. Don't tell him anything." There was one time where they told the guy, "Don't tell him anything more. He knows too much already." Yeah, and, that's what the guy told me. He said,
Oh my
said,
goodness,
"They
dude.
just told me not to tell you anything because you already know too much."
I'm getting like kind of chills right now. I could just imagine if I was there in real life. Like, oh man, I'm dealing with something big here.
Well, I thought that was odd, but I still didn't think they were demons. I didn't know what they were. I was thinking there was something wrong with it. I didn't wanna believe in
It's like an
demons.
alter ego, right?
Yeah, yeah, like something in their subconscious or an alter ego or something, it was
Split personality or something.
yeah, something I did it didn't cross my mind that they were demons, but, I could see, like you were saying, they were intelligent, but I still wasn't ready to go, "Yeah, yeah, these are demons. This is something else." Um, but the evidence just kept building and building and building, well past the point where I think anybody else would have went, "Yeah, they're demons," not me. It kept going, going, going. And as these patterns started accruing, I got to wondering, like, what would happen if I started interfering with these patterns, you know, and pissing these voices off by blocking them or changing them or doing something with them. So I'd start giving these guys in my groups homework and call them back once every week and ask them, "Well, what had happened? What happened when you did, your activity that you were assigned for the week?" You know, and one of them was the 23rd Psalm. All of them came back, said the voices hated the 23rd Psalm. All of them. They didn't like it. You know, they
Oh
didn't. They
boy.
didn't like them reading the Bible. They didn't like them going to church. They didn't nothing religious. They didn't want anything with to do with religious. So that even that wasn't enough, to make me think, well, these must be demons. So as as we started finding ways to interfere with these patterns, my prisoners started coming back and going, the voices don't want us coming here. They don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like your homework. They didn't want us coming here. They were screaming all the way over here. They did. They said, "Stay home and fake like you're sick." Um, but they didn't. They didn't like these. They didn't like these patterns being interfered with. They didn't like me asking questions about them. So that was coming in from all of them. They were all saying the same thing. The voices didn't like what I was doing, and I went, "Good. Give them more of the same." And that was the game plan back then. If I found something they didn't like, give them more of it. you know and the prison was set up for that kind of stuff. If they were they were always on alert for somebody going off or something like that. Now at the state hospital, if somebody went off, and started screaming and left your office that way, everybody'd be all upset. And I think part of that was because of psychiatrists were always getting beat up. So I think they were afraid of these guys to some degree, you know so they didn't want to upset them. The unwritten rule in the state hospital was, don't do anything to upset a schizophrenic unless
Right.
absolutely necessary. That was the unwritten rule. So asking questions about the voices was upsetting them. You don't do that. You know, in the prison, no big deal. That it didn't. It wasn't even a factor. you know. And even if one of the prisoners went and told the warden, said, "Hey, this psych is asking me all these questions about the voices, and I don't like it. I'm getting up. He's upsetting me." The warden would go, "Yeah, get out of here. Go play in the traffic." It wouldn't even hit the level that would cause any concern whatsoever. You know. So I kept going with the homework and coming back and finding out, how they were reacting to it. And finally, one guy turns around after he told me what was going on. He turns around in the doorway as he's about to leave, and he goes, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And he's just looking at me, and I'm like, I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. I'm like, where did that come from? I didn't think, you know, I didn't think I was doing anything that could be dangerous. They're stuck in their heads. They're not bothering me. You know. but it was another thing I threw in the back, the little backpack I have in the back of my head, and it's like a warning,
Yeah.
it was like a warning. And he was serious about it, and then he turned around and he walked away. And I'm like, I wonder what that was about, you know. But I remembered it, but I didn't pay any attention to it. I kept going. The next thing that happened was um, one of them, one of the guys I was working with, somehow got into the medical unit. I didn't send him a pass. He just got in there. I don't know how he got in. He knocks on my door. I open the door and I recognize him as one of these groups I'm working with, one of the group members I'm working with. And he said, "The voices want to talk to you." And I said, "They want to talk to me personally?" He said, "Yeah, they want to talk to you personally." And I'm like, "Okay, come on in, have a seat." Closed the door and I said, "Well, what do they got to say?" And these words came out of his mouth: "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." Boom.
Oh my
My head
goodness.
went boom. It just blew open. It was at that moment that I realized that these were entities. And
Right.
the prisoner himself, he goes, "That wasn't me. I swear that wasn't me. I didn't say that. The voices said that." And he was serious. I could tell he wasn't lying. And I went to tell him something like, well, just tell him this." And he said, "I don't have to tell them anything. They can hear everything you're saying. They can see everything you're doing." And that kind of freaked me out, because I wasn't sure that they could, you know. So that was another thing. So my head just boom. It's like they are entities.
Yeah, that's an eye
These
opener, brother.
Oh, it's like somebody took a brick back to the back of my head,
Oh man.
you
Okay,
know.
so like uh emotionally kind of like how did that make you feel?
I was
Were you
stunned. I was
stunned?
absolutely stunned. I was just like, it felt like Outer Limits, do 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 do. It's like,
Yeah.
where is this going? Where is this going? Uh, how bad can it get? You know, what was it that warned me to stop? How
Yeah.
much power does it have? Um, I didn't know. Up until that time, I wasn't affected by them. I couldn't feel them, or I didn't get headaches, or I didn't get any weird feelings or anything. It was more curiosity, you know. And I was an adrenaline junkie too, and so
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that helped a
yeah.
lot. That helped a whole lot.
Yeah. One experience I had on an ambulance call, we went to a guy, it was a behavioral psych issue. We get there, his girlfriend comes out of the house, says, "Hey, he's not taking his medications anymore and he won't talk anymore." So, he came out of the house, police searched him real quick, handcuffed him to the stretcher, because I think there was something along his record or history pertaining to being violent at some point. And so he's on the stretcher. We get him in the back of the ambulance. Again, he's handcuffed and we're on the way to the hospital. And so, I'm talking to his girlfriend. I'm like, "Hey, how are you? Are you doing okay?" Because I know she's affected by the illnesses that he's going through. And, this was back when I also just became familiar of your work. This was probably like a year ago now or something. Um, and and so also, I've worked with Vicky Joy Anderson. Right? Are you familiar with who she is?
I
Well,
don't think
she
so.
gets into some of this stuff too. She doesn't have the background that you have and the experiences, but she talks a lot about sleep paralysis and a lot of these entities that kind of have encounters with people through that. So I'm talking to the girlfriend, and I'm talking to her, and we get into the conversation about Jesus. We get into the conversation about church. And I feel like what the gentleman was going through an entity attack or some sort of demonic oppression with the schizophrenia, the bipolar, and all of the other things that come with that. He was mute and he wouldn't talk, and he wasn't talking for like a week. And so I asked his girlfriend, I said, "Ma'am, can I pray with you?" And so I started praying, and he literally, like, slowly turned his head and, like, locked eyes on me, and then, like, turned his head sideways. And the whole entire ride, he didn't give pay me any attention. It looked like he was in there, but there was just nothing there, nothing behind his eyes. But then all of a sudden, when I started to pray and started to do these things, then I got his attention somehow. And there's been some other examples too that I've had where people have gripped the sides of the stretcher and have looked at me and growled and they were snarling and all this kind of stuff. But just wanted to share that with you because, man, seeing that kind of stuff in real life is kind of like a brick to the back of the head. A little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. Fast forward a few years when I started figuring out enough to help these guys out, and they would recover. The voices would disappear. That night, when one of the prisoners told me the voices are gone, I haven't heard them. That night, I would get crushed into my bed at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Just was like something was crushing me into the bed. Every
Oh,
single
man.
time one of these guys fully recovered, you know, that was scary.
Oh,
That
they
was
were not
really
happy,
scary. They were
Jerry.
not happy. And they found I mean, I'm like 17 miles away from the prison. They found me at home in my bed at night. They
Wow.
knew where I was, you know.
I think they not only know where you are, I think they know everything about you.
Well, there was one there was one gal, this is when I was working psych crisis in the emergency rooms. I walk into the psych annex and I see this girl laying in one of the psych beds over there, and I go onto my computer and kind of get assigned my cases for the night. She was one of the ones that I was assigned to evaluate. When I brought her in, one of the first things she said is she said, "The voices told me to stay away from you, that you were dangerous." And I hadn't seen this girl in my life. Never spoke to her before, never saw her before. Uh, so I went, that's interesting. But so this thing kept going. So after the "you have no right to interfere with our way of life," I didn't stop. I kept going, but I was like, where is all this going? What is happening? Um, and I'm still thinking, well, they still can't affect physical reality, which I was to find out that wasn't true. I just didn't know it at the time. So I was reading a book by Miguel Ruiz, The Voice of Knowledge, and it was talking about similar entities that were also parasites. They would feed off of the emotional energy of their victims. So I brought that book into the prison. I brought one of the prisoners I was working with in there, and I said, I brought this book, and I want to read you this paragraph, and I want you to tell me what you think about it. Because I was always asking these guys questions. I was always bringing them stuff in. I was always checking what one said against what another one thought. So in these patterns, when I discovered a pattern, I didn't just put it down there. I mean, there were like 25 or 30 people before I would write it down as a pattern. So I would start asking all the others, "Does this happen to you?" And if it did, it went down. So in this case, I started reading the paragraph, and it was talking about how these things were energetic parasites, that they were feeding off of people. And when I hit that part, I looked up at him, and he was just staring at me like a zombie. And all of a sudden, this crackling broke out behind my head. It sounded just like an electrical arc welder. It was loud. It sounded just like I mean, it was as loud as you're standing right next to an electrical arc welder and welding. The crack, crack, crack. It sounded just like it.
Oh,
It
wow.
started moving to the right toward my right hand office wall, and I'm looking there. I don't see anything. I hear it, but I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. There's no smoke there. I don't feel anything. And I turn around and I look at him, and he's staring at me like a zombie. I said, "Do you hear that?" he didn't respond. He just kept staring at me like a zombie, and just a just blank stare. And I'm like, he's going to attack, So I push my chair against the back of the wall in case he does. And then I'm trying to split my attention between this noise and watching him to see if he's going to come out of his chair at me. And this thing is crackling at a 45-degree angle up the right hand wall. Crack, 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 all the way up the wall. And I'm looking at him. He's just staring at me. And then it goes across the back of the room where I could hear it and I could track the noise, but I could see him at the same time. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall. And all this took minutes. It wasn't just a short little, crackle here and there. This went on for minutes.
Get out of here.
It
Oh my
slowly went on for
goodness.
minutes. And it's like, what the dickens is going on here? And I'm like freaked out, like watching him with his zombie stare, trying to see what's going on in here. And it crackles down the wall, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can near my left leg. So I take a glance at him, and then I look down in there. It's crackling, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's not even any paper there. The inmate porter had cleaned it the night before. There wasn't anything in there, and then boom, just like that, it went dead. It went out. You know, and I'm like stunned. And I look at him, and he slowly gets up, and he goes, "I gotta leave." And he shuffles out of the office. He doesn't walk out. He shuffles.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
normally he would just walk out. He didn't walk. He shuffled out. You know, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, go, go, get
Yeah,
away
yeah,
from
yeah,
me.
yeah. Get out of here right
And I
now.
was relieved. So after he left, I'm stunned. And I start examining the walls to see if there's any burnt marks on there. And, there's no evidence that anything had ever happened. So I go out in the hall. I look at the doctor's office. It's locked. He's not in yet. The nurse's office is locked. She's not in yet. There's nobody there. There's nothing that I could see that could have caused that crackling noise. And I'm a welder. I weld all the time, but it was like sounded like that, but there wasn't any smoke. There wasn't any electricity. There wasn't any sparks. There wasn't anything. Just so it was 3 to 4 months later. Finally got the nerve to call this guy back in. And he shows up in my office, and he's looking good. He's got lots of energy. I thought he'd be a wreck. I thought he'd be an absolute wreck if something like that had control of him, but he didn't. And I said, "You look good. I'm surprised." And he goes, "Well, why are you surprised? I'm doing what you told me. I haven't lost any ground, but I haven't gained any either." So he's basically where he was. And there was no zombie stare. He was back to his normal self. So I said, "Have a seat." I said, we did a little bit of small talk, and then I said, did you hear that crackling noise when you were in here last time?" And he said, "Yeah, I did, but I'm surprised that you did. So you're surprised that I heard it." And I said, "Yeah, I heard it." I said, "What was that?" He said, "That was them." I said,
Oh my goodness.
I said, "Them, the voices?" And he said, "Yeah, those were the voices." And I said, "Well, what in the blazes were they doing?" He said, "They were trying to scare you off." And I said, "They did a damn good job of it." you know? And I said, I asked him, I said, "When you got up and you left," I said, you looked like a freaking zombie. I mean, you were just out of it." I said, "What were the voices telling you as you left the office?" He said, "They were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut." And I'm thinking, no, he wouldn't do that. I know this guy, worked with him for 6 months. He wouldn't do something like that. And then I asked him, I said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" And he said, "I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one." Yeah.
Wow. So I was gonna say just because of what you were talking about with I mean, let's just say it's just a tremendous amount of static in the air that sounded like a welding gun was going off. I mean,
But
I
it
was
was
gonna,
localized. It wasn't everywhere. It was very localized.
yeah, almost like you could follow it with your eyes, you
I
just
could
can't see
follow it
it.
with my eyes. I just couldn't see it.
That's so crazy because I was going to say Legion, something along those lines. And when he said them. So it's obviously more than one uh, entity that was causing this.
Yeah, and there was one that I asked the name of the voices, and they answered that. They said, "We are legion," just like in the Bible, you know?
Yeah.
So, these things are negative entities. They're, I guess you could call them archons,
Hmm.
you know? Um, the first way I got to notice them was, um, Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, wrote about heaven and hell. One of his books was Heaven and Hell, and he described these demons, which were very similar to what I was seeing with the schizophrenic voices. And then I ran into a fella who wrote the book The Presence of Other Worlds, of Wilson Van Dusen. He was a clinical psychologist that worked at a prison in northern Arizona. And when I read his book, after what I experienced, I said, I got to find this guy. Um, so I finally tracked him down, and he was leery. He was leery. And then finally, I convinced him, "Hey, listen, I see what you see. Um, I'm working with these things also." But he was doing something very different. I immediately knew they were enemies. I knew they weren't good things. Whatever they were. He was trying to make friends with them so they would tell him stuff. You know, uh, And what he did is at one point, he separated the patient from the voices, and he gave the voices and the patient an MMPI and a Rorschach test independently. So he told the patient, he said, "I want you to take this. I don't want the voices entering into it. Then I'm going to give it to the voices and see what the difference is."
So what kind
He
of
s-
test? What kind of test is this, by the way?
Well, the MMPI is a multiphasic inventory, personality inventory. It's like the gold standard for psychologists. It's a
Okay.
personality profile test. It came out that uh, this guy was psychotic, and then he gave it to the voices, and the voices came out even more psychotic than the patient.
Wow.
So they were worse off than he was, and he gave them a Rorschach and found the same result. You know? So they would always lie to him. They wouldn't tell him the truth. So I don't think he got as much out of them as I did by trying to get rid of them. Because they were in a battle. You know, I was their enemy. They were my enemy. Um, but yeah, they the voices are not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says they are. You know, these things are entities. They're negative entities. They're demons. They're archons, and they hit us all. Virtually every negative thought you have go through your head comes from them. They can insert those thoughts into your thought stream, and what they want you to do is believe that those thoughts came from you. You know, everybody assumes that because you have a thought in your head, it belongs to you. That's not right. That's not true.
Yeah, I
Um,
say too on the show a lot that we can think. I think our actual thoughts are what become our ideas. Like if I'm sitting here thinking of something, then yes, those are my thoughts because now I'm coming up with an idea. I'm problem solving, for example, or something. But if I'm just on a run and then all of a sudden, a thought or something pops into my mind, I don't think it's something from my subconscious, coming out necessarily. I think it's literally something's trying to plant something in there, or
yes.
for some sort of purpose, either to like fall in sin or to be in sin or to maybe stray you away from the faith of some sort. A generalization of it, and I'm not saying that's all the thoughts
Yeah.
that they're trying to do, but
Well,
you know,
Manuel Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are yours. They either come from heaven or they come from hell. Or somewhere in between. That your brain is like a radio receiver. It
wow,
it
yes,
picks up on the frequency. That so for instance, I think last year I live in Tucson, Arizona, out away from town, and you know we don't have any grass out here. It just takes too much water. So I was out in the backyard with a machete, just cutting back the cactus. And I have a beautiful white husky. that was out there with me. And here I am with the machete in my hand, cutting the cactus. The dog runs by, and this voice booms into my head, cut its head off, cut her head off. And I was shocked. I'm like, and I'm here I am holding a machete with this thought going through my mind. And it shocked me. It was like I knew it wasn't my thought, but even so, it it shocked me, you know. They feed off of that kind of stuff,
Right,
you know.
right. I mean, let's just
And
look at go ahead.
well, the other thing is they sound exactly like your regular thoughts, right? So they want you to believe that what you're hearing is not them, but you. They don't want you to make a differentiation between you and them. And
Right,
that's very dangerous if you can't tell the difference between them and who you are. That's one of the things if a schizophrenic's ever going to recover, they have to understand that those voices are not who they are. And the voices want them to believe that yes, they are what the voices tell them they are. Unfortunately, the psychiatric mafia are telling them your brain is broken, the voices are hallucinations, you've got a life sentence. The only thing you can do is take these toxic drugs and come and pay us a bunch of money every month. You know, so it's like they're telling them the opposite of what they need to do. I mean, they need to fight back against these things. They can't just go, "Oh, my mind is broken and I can't do anything. I'm helpless," which is the message that the psychiatric mafia has given these people.
right,
You know?
right. It's a circling system, right? That
Yeah.
keeps these people in this state, if that makes any
Right.
sense. Like for example, I've had a guy on who talks about, you know, like SRAs. Are you familiar with the term SRA?
Mm.
Okay, so yeah, so some of these people are broken. They've come from households, families, and other parts of life through childhood that they've just been mentally torn apart. Even people that have gone through Hollywood and the acting industry and all this kind of stuff where they're introduced to certain things, it's also torn them apart. And trying to re-put these people back together, um, all they kind of do is just want to throw you on medication, and that's it.
Yes. That's it.
You
They
know,
don't talk to you. They don't spend any time with you. They just how the med's working, and that's it. The whole thing is drugs. They're making $7.4 billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs on the planet. In the United States, 50,000 people a year are killing themselves. That's as many as died in Vietnam year after year after year after year.
oh wow,
50,000 a year. And where are those thoughts coming from to kill yourself?
right,
That's
right,
not a part of a regular normal human being.
yeah.
you know, Infused with a survival instinct, survive at all costs, and a great many of those people are on these psychiatric drugs, antidepressants and antipsychotics, and there's still these mass murderers, virtually, a great many of them are psychotic. They're hearing voices. They
Yeah.
tell the judge, "Oh, I didn't do that." They don't even remember doing it. "Oh, I don't remember doing that." Or if they do, they got the voices told me to do it.
Yeah, there's such a connection too with the conversations that we're having and the experiences that you're kind of giving us that make me think of like MK Ultra as well. I don't know if you're familiar with MK Ultra, but it's
Yeah, I
this,
am.
brainwashing program that the
Yep.
government has been a part of for a long time, and I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
know, it's devastating.
yeah, yeah. And why
You
why
know?
why why did MK Ultra go from, programming and conditioning through our sensory system, right? Audio, video, all that kind of stuff, where now they actually got the occult involved in it because they saw that it actually works. It actually works bringing in these entities to be the driver, right, of the car like we talked about earlier, or, maybe they're exploiting the sin out of people by these little voices. Like, look at the world that we're living into today. It's crazy some of the acts that are being done. They're completely evil.
Yeah,
For example, you
yeah,
mentioned that thought that popped into your mind of when you had the machete. It's like we see this thought not the exact thought, but these evil thoughts being popped up in many people's heads, and they're actually going out and acting these things out. Why do
Yeah,
video games
because
have so much violence in it?
that's it. It's like, here they're selling these violent video games to kids, teaching them this is the way you solve your problem. You gotta go out and you get a gun and you start shooting everybody. And then they try to take away the people's guns and, and destroy the Second Amendment when they're the ones that are allowing this to happen in the first place. Those violent video games ought to be banned,
Yeah,
And then you look at television. I mean, by the time a kid grows to the age of a teenager, he's watched what, thousands of murders on TV,
yeah.
war stories, murder mysteries, you know, news reports of people killing each other. I mean,
Right, right. Well, look at the female aspect of it too, right? You've got all these image generators, and you've got all these things with Photoshop, and a lot of people are using it, and these women, they this is nothing against women, but some of these women, they'll post pictures of themselves, but it's not how they actually look, but it's an
yeah,
edited version of it. So then you have someone, a young kid, maybe in high school or middle school, seeing how some of these girls are in life, and they wish they envy towards them, but then they also look at themselves like they're not as good, or
yeah,
they're not as pretty, right? They're not as beautiful as some of these other girls, and it just kind of just destroys the individual from the inside. And that's where more of these thoughts, right? This thought war that we're in starts to
right.
come in and starts to destroy the heart of of this individual, you know?
Yeah, people need to realize that not all their thoughts belong to them, and virtually every negative thought is put there by one of these demonic entities,
Hmm.
trying to get you to act in a certain way or to feel bad. They feed off of that negative emotional energy that people generate when they're paranoid or angry or upset or, they feed off of that negative emotion. That's their food.
Right, right. And
So
I
you
think,
you look at all the wars. Look at the war in Ukraine now. Look at all the suffering there. The families that have been broken up. The kids that have been killed. The the mothers and kids that don't have a father now. I mean, massive amount of um, horrible negative emotion being generated there. Like, and it's a feeding trough for these things. Trump's trying to get in there and stop it, and he's being thrown out every time he tries to get in there. No, we're not stopping.
mhm.
Russia's economy is collapsing. Ukraine is in cinders, and they still won't stop.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's so funny when you really kind of break down the reality for what's behind the curtain rather than seeing what's on the surface, if or on the stage. I really think that we are in a spiritual war with everything.
Yes.
I think we're like the little chess pieces that are being
Yeah.
moved around here, you know? So, yeah, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Just know that, every negative thought that comes into your mind is coming from them,
Yep.
and you don't have to let in those thoughts. You do not have to entertain them. They want you to entertain them. You know, it's stuff like, oh, why did I say that? Oh, well, what did I hurt this person? They put in all this doubt and obsession in your mind to try to get you upset, and then they feed off of that that negative emotional
Yes.
energy they generate.
Exactly. Exactly. And with all the technology today, I really don't think we're supposed to have thousands of followers. We're not supposed to see hundreds of comments on our videos. We're not supposed to see all of these things that I think really kind of tarnish how the mind is actually what it's actually created for. I think it's too much consumption, too much to articulate for our minds, and that's where we even get more of these thoughts, right? Or maybe more of the energy builds up for these things to interact with us on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, they want you focused outside of yourself.
Yeah.
They don't want you focused on you being a divine spark of God. You know, that's the last thing they want you to know. They want you focused on all this garbage going on around you and accumulating physical properties and satisfying urges and pleasures, and they want you focused outside of yourself. They don't want you to know who you really are.
Right. Right. Well, Jerry, look, there's one more segment I want to kind of get in with you, and then we can wrap it up. But with Where do you think we are today? And what do you think the future is going to be like?
Well, Edgar Casey says that in 2026, the planet is virtually going to blow apart. You know, he was 80% right on his predictions.
Mhm.
Uh, and basically because the planet's moving away from God. You know, you look at communist China, they don't let Christians in there. Zelensky just outlawed Christianity in Ukraine. You know, you got France is burning down all their churches. You know, even that big cathedral, somebody burnt that down. Um, you know, I have hope for this country basically since Trump got in there. Um, you know, he's waking people up, but whether it's enough for the entire planet, I don't know. You know, you got the riots in France right now. You got riots in England right now. You got riots in Nepal right now. You got all these economies on the verge of collapsing. You know, overall, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, yeah, I know. You're right.
But
Um,
then again, we're spiritual beings. So, I mean, this is just a car that we drive around where we're on the planet. You know, you don't die. You know, you just transform. You go into another state.
right on. Right
You
on,
know,
man.
if you
Yes.
read some of Bob Monroe's work, he could get out of his body at any time, and he would travel all over the universe, come back. Um, Interesting what he has to say. So we're spiritual beings. You know, your spirit leaves, your body's dead. You know, we don't die.
Yep, we just move on to the
Next door,
yeah.
next phase.
Yeah, that next yep, exactly. That little next dimension or wherever, right? We kind of leave this plane, go to the next one. If
Yes.
that makes sense, man. But Jerry, brother, what an episode. I really would love to collaborate with you further in the future with and get a couple of guests on at the same time where I really think the conversations will just erupt with not only a lot of wisdom and knowledge, but we could all share some more experiences with each other, and just share a good message, to the audience, man. So the floor is yours if you want to share any last message with the audience, and then after that, just let them know where they can support you the most and find your book as well.
Yeah. My book's on Amazon. You can also get it from Lulu Publishing. Um, it's on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can order it through there. This MACE psychoenergetic method that I mentioned earlier is a energetic psychotherapy. It's not like a conventional psychotherapy. It's not a talk therapy. It works with energy because your mind is energy, your thoughts are energy, your spirit is energy. You're an energetic being, and all psychiatry does is pours drugs on your brains and turns you into a zombie. Nobody's being cured. This is the success rate with this thing is incredible. I've never seen anything work as well as it. There's information about it on my website too at jerrymarzinsky.com. Um, and just realize that you're not your thoughts. You're the one watching your thoughts. You're the one listening to your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. So watch what comes into your head because a lot of those thoughts aren't coming from you. They're coming from a dark source that's trying to sabotage you. You
Right
look at
on.
the divorce rate, almost 50% divorce rate in the United States right now. I think it's 45 point something. And then 50,000 people a year killing themselves. Who's telling them to do that? Where are those thoughts coming from?
Right. Right, man.
Yeah, so get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
Amen, brother. Amen. Yeah, it's a big chess game. It really is. It's a big chess game. We have a stronger move than we really think, and that's something that we need to, consider a lot more on the daily, especially with our thoughts. And that's one way that we can fight back. And oh my goodness, is it like the cartoons were really telling us something back in the day with the
Well,
angel and the little
yeah, yeah.
devil?
That's exactly what Swedenborg says is going on. You have two guardian angels and two demons assigned to you all the time, and they're always trying to get your attention. You know, who you give the most attention to is the one that's going to win.
Right. Right. Well, Jerry, brother, this has been a blessing. What a show. Thank you very, very much. Folks,
You're
please
more than
be sure
welcome.
to go and check out his book, support him where he, has his outlets and everything like that. Jerry, brother, thank you again so much. And we're going to move right on over to the next segment.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen. The Biblical Hitman debrief. Oh my goodness, what an episode. Oh man, I can't tell you how many times I got chills in the middle of that episode. Folks, shout out to Jerry Marzinsky. Give him a round of applause. What a gentleman. And man, what a warrior for God. I will say this because getting into some of the things that he was talking about and dealing with some of these things, um, whoa, brother. Whoa. Um, Give me a 10-foot pole while dealing with some of these people. But, you know, I know we got into a lot of the experiences, a lot of the discussion of what these entities are and their contribution to our reality, especially with the idea factor. Whoa, dude. Whoa. But also, I want to applaud him for being in that community and in that circle where he's trying to help these people as well. These people are going through a battle. These people that have these conflicts with this illness, aka demonic entities, is a real thing. Again, I've shared some of my experiences with just my personal runs at work and what I have to bring to the table pertaining to the subject matter. But man, the fact that, especially the stories when he was getting into these things, these voices speaking through these people directly to him is something that blew me away. You know, I was getting chills just talking to him, with some of these stories. But just imagine if you were literally there. Imagine you were being him in that moment, and the fact that you're not speaking to something that you can see, and it's using a human being as a vessel, as a transponder, a repeater, if that's what you want to call it. And it's so funny how he was kind of also comparing the brain as almost like I forget exactly what he called it, but like a router or something that can be affected by frequency, right? Transponder of some sort, right? It's like a radio antenna, right? This is all very interesting stuff because I'm sick and tired of the mainstream and I'm sick and tired of the medical field, right? Looking at things so objectively, right? Because when you, especially, me working in the medical field, I understand the objective analysis of science and I understand the objective interpretation of how to deal with things in the science field, especially in the medical field. But man, I think if we were as a humanity, as a race, as a people of the world, if we actually started looking at some of these issues that we have medically through the spiritual lens, I think we can dig deeper into a lot of things. And what's so crazy as well, which we brought up on the show, was how we treat these people and how when they get into this farm system, right, of the medical industry, it seems to be like you're just in this cul-de-sac and you're just kind of just circling the cul-de-sac. You're not you're there's a lot of things that are getting band-aids put on some of these issues rather than the issues actually getting resolved from the source. And what also is interesting too is when people are on medications, I think it also activates certain doorways that it can suppress uh, certain things with the brain, right? Like, who knows exactly what we are doing at the chemistry level with a lot of these things? We only know what we can prove, right? And I think that's what's going on as well, right, in the medical field. But we need to take a deeper look at the cause and effect with a lot of these issues. I think energy has to deal with it. I think that, the principalities, the powers, and the spiritual wickedness that is involved in our reality, right, that we can't see because we can only really pick up so much of the spectrum of light. We talked about that with Brad, in one of the episodes prior to this one. We get into this understanding that we are not alone. We are not the only things that we are wrestling against. We're not the only things that exist, right? We are dealing with spiritual matter, and I think that once we become more normalized to that understanding, a lot more things in this life will start to make sense. The fact that our ideas are not our own is something that we need to really start to put on the spectrum, right? We need to literally start to slow down and analyze certain things in our lives a little deeper. I think this is why the Bible talks about our heart is deceitful as one thing, but also there's other verses, and I think I even pulled up some of them here in the middle of the show, and I actually want to see if I can go back. So I just typed this into Google, right? But typing into Google, I said Bible verses on thoughts, and so give me a few here, and we'll see what Google gives us, right? But Philippians 4:8, which encourages focusing on what is true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and good report. Um, that's just kind of breakdown of what that verse is. Also, Proverbs 4:23, which says to guard your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And so, just with those two things, right? Like, guard your heart. What does that mean? So, thinking about it, our heart could be maybe the base of our decisions, and thoughts manipulate our decisions. So if we are to guard our hearts, then we are to observe our thoughts and then analyze those thoughts and then make a proper decision out of that. Let's just look at what we covered in the episode, folks, especially with the patterns that he was talking about with some of these people, is that, and what their conflict is against, is that they were dealing with these issues of, taking themselves out of this world. Who in the right mind would even think that that's something that's okay? And how does that thought naturally come into the mind? I know we did get into the idea of, violence and video games and how culture can maybe manufacture some of these thoughts, right? And obviously the subconscious can maybe produce some of these things, but then again, like, are these still an organic thought? Right? Or does it open more doorways for these things to come in and then to plant these thoughts? It's almost like the Tulpa effect, right? It's like ideas become beliefs, beliefs become manifestation. It's like, why were the ancient Tibetan Buddhists, right, trying to make connection with entities in the seventh kind, by the way, the seventh kind being that literally they were manifesting these things in the same room that they were in. And they would use this tulpa effect to get this outcome, to manifest these entities, to communicate with them, to see them, to even touch them, right? And to literally, physically bring them into our existence. So I can only see the same thing happening with our thoughts, right? These thoughts become beliefs, and these beliefs become manifested. Look at our day to day, folks. The culture is torn apart, it's fractured. There's so much going on right now. There's so much negative energy in the air. We can feel it. Like, we understand that something has changed. There's a different gear that we've switched into in our reality and in life in general. It only feels like the snowball may have just started. but it's like we get that feeling where we know the snowball is rolling down the hill. And so when it's rolling down the hill, we know that it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's going to catch more and more and build up over time. And so I don't think we're at that balloon popping point yet, but my goodness, are we starting to feel that, man, we need to do something to slow this down or to get it completely off track or to just stop it in its tracks, at the end of all of it. So it's really a lot going on. I feel so bad for some of the people that are out there battling with, you know, uh, this kind of a conflict. And I've seen it. I've seen it in their eyes. I've seen it. I've seen them, face to face out on the streets. And there's a lot of people that are going through this. There really is. And I think that there's people that are just living with it, normal day-to-day people. They don't have to be in a psych ward to necessarily be battling with some of these effects from these demonic beings. We know that the Nephilim, right, were pretty violent. Not only were they violent, they were pretty evil, right? And not only do they hate God, and you know what? We've had some people on the show talking about good Nephilim that can be redeemed and all of this, and maybe some of them had a change in hearts. Maybe some of them had repentance. But for the majority, I can only think that they loved their fathers, that they loved what they stood for. We're talking about the rebellion. We're talking about fallen angels. We're talking about literally the almost the first. There's the first creation in some idea, right? That God made, and how pissed off are they when God created us? They it's almost like, and the fact that God gave us dominion over this realm, over this place, this earth. It's as the first child being born, it's like, what? How does the second child get the birthright? And that's kind of like what you see. That's the trend you see in the Bible, right? Like you see it with Jacob and Esau. You see it, Abel and Cain. You kind of see these same kind of patterns with our creation. It's all very interesting. It really is. I'm almost thinking that this is the meta narrative, right? We've had, my boy Doc Brown on. He talks about it in his book, right? He talks about this meta narrative. This is why the bloodline war exists. This is why, some of these families that exist with these genealogies, they hold themselves at a higher power over other bloodlines. And they think that they have authority over us. It's like it makes no sense. Why would we have movies like Elysium, right? To where there's going to be this Atlantis, but it's only the ones in Atlantis that will have all of the food, all of the good things, and have all of the proper medical care and all the things that will help you live forever and all this. But then it's here are the people on Earth. I'm making a comparison from the movie Elysium right now, but the people on Earth were working hard, day to day, just to get some food, like to barely nutrify the body, right? And they want to separate civilization in this way. They want the 1% to rule over the 99, like for real. Okay. Um, and it all stems from back to these spiritual entities that are moving us around like chess pieces. Now, one day will these entities kind of maybe manifest in our reality? I can subscribe to that. I think that this may be something that comes in the future. Who knows what it's going to look like? We can only speculate, right? A lot of it's speculation. But the one thing that we need to understand fully here and stop speculating on is that, do these demonic entities exist? They exist. It's a part of our reality. Like, get with the program. And that's one thing that I'm trying to do on this show and trying to spread some of the knowledge and share it with others with the awesome guests that I do have on, because there's warfare going on, and I'm trying to get people on the right team. That makes sense. It's not me trying to do it. It's God in me. That God's working through me to try and share the gospel of Christ, to share, the truth and the light of the world, to share that, we are a creation that is tainted and evil, like just natural from birth, right? Satan kind of puts you in this matrix even from the womb, to where when you're born into this reality, you just think that it all of this just is because, right? You don't understand the full story. You've got to unplug from this matrix, get into the Bible, get saved, and you've got to come to Christ. And then you fully are like reborn and your eyes are opened and you're like, wow, this is the truth of my reality. And a lot of people are out there seeking a lot of different things. They're trying to find some sort of truth in this world. And I feel like that's where the devil is also working against God, right? And his agenda, where he's casting out all this big net and trying to get people in. You got people falling in for the new age movements. You got people falling in for all the other things that are, little channels or avenues to get sucked into that web. But that's what we do here at the Biblical Hitman, folks. We're taking out those narratives. Heavy fire, heavy fire, unlimited ammo, baby. Unlimited ammo, right? So we're here to spread the light of Christ. We're here to spread the truth, the gospel. People need to come to the Lord, and repentance is a big thing. It's so funny how the Bible talks about repentance, and you get a lot of the churches speaking on one specific idea of repentance, and that's to turn away from sin. Yes, yes, I agree. We should turn away from sin. Jesus himself has told us to sin no more, to turn away from sin, repent. But there's other uh, areas in the Bible where repentance is used in a way, and when you get back into the Greek, right? You get to what some of these words are. They change a little bit. They're different words, and they have different meanings. And one of those meanings is to turn the way of thinking, like turn away from how you've initially thought about stuff, and turn to the proper way of thinking. Turn to the truth and all of that. But folks, this episode has been awesome, exhilarating, bone chilling. Jerry Marzinsky, brother, thank you so much. I appreciate you for coming on. And folks, we're going to be working with him in the future as well. We're going to actually try and get him on, and one of almost a survivor of schizophrenia from the past. And so we're going to actually maybe get some firsthand POV experience and stories from of what it's like to, have some sort of interaction with these demons. It's kind of crazy to even say, but I believe it. I believe all of it. We are in a spiritual battle. There's a cosmic chess game going on between God and these forces, and in the end, the Lord will win. But folks, if you stuck with us this long, I appreciate you. I love you. Real quick to the audience, I really do thank you all for getting through each episode and just sharing your attention with the things that I have to say, and sharing your attention with the audience that I bring. I mean, with the guests that I bring on. It's really, it holds so much value to me. I take so much time away from my family. I take so much time away from doing other things, because I feel this is what God's will is being poured into me. I'm just doing what I feel God is calling me to do, and that's in some way, shape, or form, how I can package that and share that with y'all. But I just want to say I appreciate y'all. I really do. On the audio side, shout out to you guys, both and the YouTube, because I know that there's ads that run through this stuff, and the ad space is something that I know it sucks, but I just want to let you know I seriously appreciate each and every one of you folks for getting through the ad space. It's something that benefits the show. It's something that benefits me, my family, my life. That we're only making like 1 cent a view, so it's like really crazy at the end of the day, where it's like probably $5 a day or something like that. It's kind of crazy, but it's just enough to cover the overhead of this show, and I'm blessed with that. I'm blessed to be able to do what I'm doing, having fun while doing it, sharing a good message, and also getting benefit, through it to cover the costs of it, the overhead and stuff like that. It's really a beautiful thing, and it keeps the show going. It really does, because things are getting expensive nowadays. I don't make a lot of money. It's crazy. I've been doing my job for 10 years, and I'm kind of just getting by. Really, the dollar's going down. It's degrading, and things are expensive in the grocery store. I was just there today. It was kind of crazy. It's frustrating a little bit to go shop nowadays, which is really sad. But again, thank you folks so much for tuning into the show. I appreciate you. I love you guys very, very much. And please drop comments. Drop comments in the comment section because I want to interact with you folks. I really do. I love building the community. I love building a connection with each and every one of you. I recognize your names. Trust me, I do. I'm starting to see who's familiar in the comments, and I think it's awesome. And the engagement is something that I get a little rush off of as well. So, folks, if you wouldn't mind, head on over to the YouTube. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, like the show, share it with your friends, comment on all the things. And as well, please support the show on audio platforms on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you consume all your podcast content. Please show your support to the show. It's free. Hit that follow button, drop a 5-star review, and hit the notifications bell. You'll be notified when we do episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And we'll see if I turn it up a notch into maybe next quarter or the quarter after that. I don't know. We're doing 3 shows a week right now, and it's a ton of work, folks. I remember I work 5 days in 2 weeks, which leaves about 2 to 3 days throughout the week that maybe I don't work. But then if I'm doing 3 shows a week, I'm doing 3 recordings a week. So I'm really working every day. And so I'm trying to produce as much content as I can for you folks. And so that we can all grow together, we can all develop just another set of skills, if that makes sense, because knowledge is power, and we can take that to great, great places. But folks, I appreciate you for tuning in, and we gonna see you next time.